Hello everybody. Today we are going to do, beginning to end sharpening of a knife with somewhat challenging blade geometry. I know it doesn't look challenging at a first glance, but this Shirogorov Ursus Quantum is quite a challenging knife, and I'll explain why as we go through the setup process. For starters, I'll draw a conventional blade here, and it has a straightaway edge right in the bottom section and then the belly. The dot represents the center of the sharpening rod rotation, and these radial lines represent the traverse of the plate holder. Now I'm adding a secondary bevel or the edge to the blades straight away, and this is the secondary bevel on the belly. The challenge with sharpening premium knives, other than the extra pressure, is you want the secondary bevel to be of the same width throughout it, unless it originally came from the factory with a varying angle of the secondary bevel. The three major challenges in setting up Shirogorov Quantum Ursus are a continuous belly. There is no straightaway on this blade. Second challenge, it has almost no flat area near the spine. It's almost the completely flat primary grind, which presents major clamping concerns. Thirdly, it has this very attractive, pronounced forward-leaning plunge line between the primary grind and the ricasso of the blade. How do we address all three challenges in our setup? If you are like me and don't want to scratch up the plunge line on a very expensive knife, you have to set up the blade in such a way that the plate comes at it without ever crossing it. And then you have to consider the traverse lines or radiuses, and to keep the angle consistent, the radius where it touches the apex has to be consistent, otherwise you're going to get a widening at the tip. And be aware, if you overthink it, you may end up with a narrowing secondary bevel toward the tip, as I'm going to show you in this example. I repeat, this is a drawing of a bad example of a setup. So here's the same blade, and now I pointed the tip toward the rear bracket of the rotary head on the sharpening unit. Don't do it, it will only exacerbate the problem because this radii will not be equal to one another. On the one hand, the blade is swinging toward the bracket and the radius is shortening, and also the belly itself creates additional shortening of the radius. I hope I'm being clear. Ask as many questions as you wish in the comments. I'll be very happy to answer them. Except where I said the radii, I know it's in incorrect English. Or is it bad Latin? How did I resolve the 2 out of 3 concerns? Here you go. I angled the tip away from the rear bracket of the rotary head, as you can see here. If this topic is of interest to you, please hit the like button. How in the world am I selecting the rotation angle of the blade? Well, here you go. Before I put the plate in, I run my media holder along the edge to see how far off it is at the tip as compared at ricasso. And I'm making the angle adjustments of the blade as I go along because the blade is not fully clamped yet. Don't get frustrated because you will never get an exact radius from tip to ricasso. And sometimes you have to make additional adjustments, like here I'm moving the blade farther out to the right in order to get it as close to ideal as possible, while understanding that it will never happen 100%. Because this belly is not a segment of a perfect circle. That is why it's the case. But I promise you this, even though there will be minor differences in width of the secondary bevel in the end, they will not be easily detectable, especially by the naked eye. Nor is there an exact formula that will accommodate every possible blade shape. It's just not possible. I stopped adjusting when I feel that my left hand does not have to move the plate holder toward the center in order to maintain basically the same radius. You have to make absolutely sure that when the plate is installed, at no point does it contact with the clamp that's holding the blade, and it does in my case here, as you can see through this rocking. I can feel it right there. To remedy this situation, you have to push the blade farther out without changing its orientation, as you see me doing here. And now you can tighten the blade. And as you approach the final position of the blade, you can start snugging up the clamps that hold it. And now I completely eliminated this rocking because the blade goes farther out. It's a little counterintuitive, but it worked in this case. So now I can torque my blade. I use the torque driver. The torque is set to 25 inch-pounds. This is an appropriate torque for a stainless screw going into aluminum clamp. I would not go any higher. And by the way, that addresses our first concern, the full flat grind. On a full flat grind blade, the primary bevel angle is only 4 to 6 degrees. So there's enough clamping force there to absorb that angle, and the clamps close up symmetrically. At least that has been my experience to date. And it's always a good idea to double check if you're not crossing the plunge line. And here's my amazingly high-tech solution to creating a sharpening plate bump stop near the ricasso, near the plunge line. It's just a rubber band. Everybody has a lot of them laying around. And the cool thing about them, if you are too aggressive, it'll start breaking up, giving you enough indication that you maybe need to reduce your enthusiasm or replace the bumper. And I've seen other people do other things. Next huge topic is setting the correct angle for the secondary bevel, or what most normal people call the edge. So let me sketch something, and the reason I'm doing it is because with that smaller angle finder I have a couple different options on how to do it. I'll explain as I go. And here I'm drawing the blade. This is your edge or secondary bevel. This is the primary bevel, and right here is the flat of the blade, which on this particular knife is basically not there, just a very little area. On a typical kitchen knife, wider knife, 3 degrees is a normal angle for a primary bevel. On EDC knives, it's in the area of 5 degrees, plus or minus a degree. And on daggers and such, 8 degrees, maybe 10 sometimes. When people talk about the edge angle, they sometimes talk about inclusive angle, which is this one. Oops. I meant to say 40 is a typical angle for the off-the-shelf knives. But when you set it up on a sharpener, such as this one, you're talking about half that angle. So it's 20 degrees per side. But the angle from where to where. When we talk about angles, typically we talk about flat portion of the knife. So if your angle finder was set there, this would be, let's say, 5 degrees. And on the real knife, obviously we can't place the angle finder on the edge. So what are you measuring it to? To the primary bevel or to the flat of the blade? With this angle finder, either way is possible, but whether it's advisable or not, we will figure out today for the first time right in front of your eyes, at least from my perspective. But if you choose to use the primary bevel as your zero, there are a couple things you have to keep in your mind. So if this angle is 15 degrees, and I don't know why I'm drawing it ass backwards, and this angle is 5 degrees, that together gives you the 20 degree angle as compared to the flat. This is something that absolutely has to be nailed down and fully understood. If you don't take the primary bevel angle into account, you will end up with an angle that is too obtuse. If you set your device to 20, you will get 25. If you set it to 15, you get 20, etc. Once again, in this situation, a 15 degree angle will result in 20 degrees per side. In the next few minutes, I'll show you why I will not be using this method. Feel free to skip through this, but some of you will be very interested, I think, and therefore it's a worthy exercise. So here I am setting a 0 right on the primary bevel, as you can see. Unfortunately, the rod itself is not super magnetic, so I have to support the angle finder with my hand. And here I'm reading 18.9 degrees. So now if I flip it over, I have to start the process again, because the primary bevel itself can have an angle error of maybe half a degree. So I usually prefer to re-zero it in this position, which adds a step to the whole process and slows you down. Of course, you can do all the mental math you wish, but going forward, I am not going to be into it. And now I'm going to measure the rod angle on this side with the blade flipped over. And what am I getting? I am getting, sorry about that. I am getting half a degree difference from the opposite side. And I was asked that question several times. What do I do in these situations? It seems like either the clamp or the blade are asymmetrically attached to the device. So here's the method that I developed that so far works for me. As you can see, I'm removing the entire assembly of the clamp and the knife without loosening the knife. I accelerated the footage just for your convenience. Once I removed it, I flip it over and reattach it symmetrically on the opposite side of the clamp bracket. I hope nobody is skipping through this part because it's actually a very interesting, convenient, and not very tricky method to sort of reduce the error. Of course, you can swing the other way. Your error can increase, but then you just reassemble everything the way it was before. And so now that I've done it, I am getting 19.1 degree. So we cut our error by the factor of 3 from 0.6 degree to 0.2 degree. A little bit of a machine shop magic here. And here we are flipping the knife over. We got basically the same angle. And now we can measure how much error there is between the sides of the primary grind. So on this knife, they're different by 0.5, 0.6 degree. This is not something you or me need to worry about because all the cutting magic happens at apex, and the geometry of the secondary bevel is a lot more important than the error on the primary bevel. And by the way, half a degree error is considered to be perfectly acceptable even in the aerospace industry. I am definitely not concerned. Are you? Let me show you the actual method that I typically use when I'm setting up the fixed angle sharpener, and I came to it thanks to my viewers who keep posting really intelligent comments. So on this device I have a nice flat area where an angle finder, even the larger one, fits nicely. As you just saw, I zeroed out my angle finder on the base of the sharpener, and now I am going to adjust it to 15 degrees. I'm pretty sure the Shirogorov came with about 17 degree angle. So I am making it more acute. I had a video about this, and I determined through learning about the steel and its hardness that I can totally absorb a reduction in the included angle without jeopardizing the longevity of the edge. So I got 15 degrees. Always consider small error negligible. Anything below 0.1 degrees completely negligible. The reason I purchased this smaller angle finder was because it's USB-C rechargeable, and I've been using it for a while now, and I'm really enjoying the fact that I don't have to worry about the battery life. I'll throw the link in the description of this video and in a pinned comment, so that you can easily find it on Amazon. And yes, I will get a small kickback if you make that purchase. I appreciate you supporting my channel. As you can see, even though I am changing the factory angle, I am still using the Sharpie on the secondary bevel, primarily because I want to know where the flat of the plate lands on that edge. And I'm satisfied that there's very little deviation from hitting the secondary bevel at the upper limit. By the way, I was using 1000 grit SY tool plate. As you saw in my previous videos, I mixed the plate sets because I felt like the Ruixin set, the one I'm holding in my hand, did not have a fine enough step between the grits. And here I'm testing my recent upgrade to the gimbal head. I had to add a wider washer, and I'm not going to explain how I did it in this video, but later on I might have a special video dedicated to the gimbal head upgrade. So don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss it, because it's going to be some important stuff. And now we're going to double check if our ploy worked out and the angle remained the same. But also because the Ruixin plates are slightly differently configured, I have to adjust these stops or shaft colors that I added to my setup and for which I provide links in the description. I just noticed that my gimbal came loose. Apparently I don't have manly enough hands to operate the thumb screw. So I'm going to finish adjusting the stops and then address the gimbal again. Quickly making sure that I'm utilizing as much of the plate as possible without risking jumping off onto the primary grind. And now let's grab another one of these plates and set it up in the gimbal again. And I'll do a better job this time, I promise. So I'll apply a little more pressure as I'm pushing down on it, get it out of the way. I was kind of rushing through it. And again, I hate thumb screws. That's why I went to the split colors for the shaft. But here I have to persuade it a little bit with my pliers, which is what I'll have to do now for every plate swap between Ruixin and SY tools. Don't go too crazy torquing it, just enough so that you cannot unscrew it with your hand. The reason I'm mixing the two sets is because I am trying to achieve as near to the mirror polish on the secondary bevel as I can. And to achieve those means, I also have to really watch that my grind direction is always perpendicular, like this, perpendicular to the clamp holding bracket. On the screen, it looks like I'm swiping it to the left, the plate that is, but in reality, all the little diamonds on it are traveling perpendicular to that bracket, or in the same direction. Everything up to this point was just a setup procedure, and now I switched the camera angle to show you the actual sharpening process. And I am assisting my sharpening with this miniature microscope I got on Amazon for very, very little cash. It has its own app. It has 3 different light settings, plus the off light setting, and it lets me look at my blade closely to see what's going on. And what's going on this blade is the apex is pretty well rounded off. It's actually still pretty sharp, but it's not hair splitting sharp, so we're gonna address that. Somebody who owned this knife previously, I got it on the secondary market, loved the knife, did not sharpen it from the looks of it. I got factory sharpening, straight from Yaroslavl, Russia. Throughout the video you will see when I apply some pressure, because when you start your sharpening process you're basically filing down some metal. So light filing pressure is appropriate here. Nothing crazy, but nothing too soft. Any perceived flex of the blade that you observe on the screen is just that, perceived, because I added soft pads instead of the rubber pads that came on the bottom of this base plate, and that is what you see, those pads compressing. And I'm getting into the tip area, which is where you need to pay most attention. This is absolutely critical to not force the sharpening plate in any orientation other than its natural sort of lining up to the profile of the blade. I'm extremely paranoid about not effing up the tip because I critique companies that do that on my channel. I don't want to be a hypocrite. That's why I became an engineer and not a politician. You can see in the iPad what's going on with my secondary bevel. And now I'm lining the objective of the microscope to the tip, which is a little tricky to see if I am doing a good job. I do observe some widening of the secondary bevel toward the tip, but I am going to risk maintaining this angle because I know I will never get it like 100% perfect. So we'll see how it develops. And you know, sometimes with the fixed angle sharpeners, if you focus on a certain area, the bevel in that area becomes wider than on the rest of the blade, even though there's not like a blending issue. Let's change focus for a second on the grip for the plate carrier. Notice how I pinched that ball between my thumb and my forefinger, allowing the handle to pivot between them. And I'm holding the handle very lightly to allow it orient itself along the edge. I hope I'm making sense. Let me know in the comments if it wasn't very clear. So the sharpening plate glides along the secondary bevel. My only input are forward movement and downward pressure, not trying to orient the plate. If you do that, you are guaranteed to mess up your tip. And you noticed I touched the underside of the blade here and I did not apply any pressure. On the contrary, I'm trying to detect if the blade is flexing, which would mean I'm applying too much downward pressure. You should not be pressing the blade upward against the plate around the tip. And once more, if you focus too much on the tip, you will widen the bevel too much. Few passes over the tip and then moving on to the rest of the blade. Check for burr frequently. I definitely don't want to miss the moment when it starts forming. And another very important word of caution, don't try to run the plate all the way off the tip. The way it all works out, you don't need to run the edge of the plate off of the tip, because that's another guaranteed mess up. The advantage of my blade clamping schema is the tip is closest to the center of the sharpener. And because of that, I am moving the plate holder almost directly toward the gimbal when I'm nearest the tip. Look at it. There's almost no angle to it, almost no perceived swipe that I was talking about earlier. I'm going directly at the gimbal. I do believe that putting a Y-clamp for this type of knives on your sharpener is counterproductive. Feel free to purchase it. Appreciate if you use my link, but I don't recommend it for 90% of the sharpening jobs. Well, I'm trying to support my channel through ad revenue from the videos and Amazon links. Every penny is invested right back into the channel. I'm doing my level best to deliver useful information to you, and I appreciate every single one of you who comments, subscribes, likes the video, what is its new feature called, hypes the video. I appreciate that. Another critical tip is when the plate starts bumping against that rubber band that I put there, make sure that you are not changing the direction of the grind. You stop dead in your tracks when it bumps. I started grinding with a 400 grit plate because I don't want to leave too aggressive of striations. We'll see how it works out in the end. Possibly I could have started at 600. Right now I'm not forming the burr yet, so more work to do. And the tip looks pretty good, as you can see. Maybe some deviation here. Maybe I forced a pass a little too much downward, not letting the plate orient itself, so we're going to address it here a little bit. Shouldn't take more than half a dozen, maybe 10 swipes. Let's take another look, see if it's helping. This is almost a professional level setup. We might as well exercise professionalism. Still a little bit dissatisfactory, so I'm going to give it a few more passes here. I don't want to get through the sharpening and then find out that there's an imperfection at the tip. Not for this knife. For the working edge, I might have not cared as much. And by all means, this edge will still be working. This is Chromax after all. I just wanted to look top-notch. I hope you're with me on that one, and that's why you're watching this video. All right, let's take a look if we're getting anywhere. It is absolutely critical to have a way to take a close look at the blade, even if it's pain in the butt sometimes to line this microscope. It meets my needs. This is perfect, even if I have to say it myself. Time for the plate swap, and I'm switching to SY tool plate, which is at 600 grit. 600 grit did not come with Ruixin. That's why I had to mix the two brands. We'll see how it works out in the end. And by the way, when you're switching between the brands of sharpening plates, you cannot count on it being a perfectly standardized grid scale. The size of the diamonds and their sort of density on the plate varies from manufacturer to manufacturer. I did my best to compare the two before I combined the set, and I think I'm okay, but there's no good way for me to determine exactly how matched these grids are. Not to mention there's no universal scale that I can match it to. Unless you know of one, and therefore feel free to direct me to that scale in the comments. Alright, so going forward, I'm accelerating the video and I'm going to cut some parts of it out. I showed you the setup, I showed you the tools that I use, including angle finder, microscope, how I switch the plates, what I do to adjust for the plate thickness. I demonstrated the torque driver. I even showed you my little trick on how to average out the angle error. I hope you didn't skip through this part because a lot of people ask this question, so go back a few minutes and you'll find it there. So I'm going to skip to the result pretty soon here. Meanwhile, remember to double check yourself. You don't need a electronic microscope. You can use a lens or even buy inexpensive reading glasses. But I have to say this microscope has been a lifesaver for me. It basically the size of a medium flashlight, and it cost me less than 30 bucks for sure on Amazon. Before the end results, I would also like to show you the use of these non-metallic sharpening plates that came with this set of Ruixin plates. And these are, as one of my viewers pointed out, resin-bound fiber impregnated with diamonds, basically. I don't know how else to describe. So kind of think of fiberglass, but each fiber has diamonds set into it, and it's all resin-bound and kind of sits on the aluminum plate. Well, I don't know if it's aluminum or steel. Yeah, I think it's aluminum. So I skipped now all the way to the 5000 grit plate, and to remind everybody, I used 400 Ruixin, 600 SY tool, then 800 Ruixin, and 1000 SY tool, and then the rest were Ruixin, which were 1200, 3000, 5000. Right now I'm on 7500, and then I finish it up with a 10,000 grit. That 10,000 finish makes it look beautiful to the naked eye, but under the microscope you still see a lot of striations that come through from the earlier grits. And I am not positive what to do about it other than grind a lot, starting with a finer grit, maybe starting with 800. Another lesson learned, I should have popped the burr off or spend more time weakening and popping off the burr between 3000 and 5000 grits, because 7500 and 10,000, they're just not doing it very efficiently. It's totally different from honing with a ceramic stone. You feel like you're moving in a slow motion. And speaking of motion, you have to be pulling it off the edge, this type of plate, instead of running it into the edge, or you will cut right through the resin and through the fiber, and then you'll have a bad plate. For some reason, the 10,000 grit resin leaves some kind of residue, maybe because it's brand new. Right there you can see it on the secondary bevel. And trying to remove it with my fingers is not only stupidly dangerous, but also ineffective. So please carefully use the rug. Remember, it's a super sharp blade at this point. And under the microscope you see the beauty and the beastie parts of it, deep striations. And at this point I decided to stop the process, and now I'm going to show you how sharp this blade has gotten. As you know, I am bald, and my hair grows out in a funny clown pattern, so I don't have a single long strand of hair on my head or body, and that's why I'm using my beautiful wife's blonde hair here. I stretched it across the lens protector on the microscope, and it's not super stretched. It has a lot of play in it, but let's focus on the screen now. As you just saw, I reached level 9 of sharpness here. It's whittling human hair to the point where I was able to interrupt the cut and get right back into it without popping the hair in half. Of course, most people don't whittle hair for fun. They cut cardboard. So I find this paper towel tube test to be a perfect way to determine how sharp the blade is, because unsupported tube is really hard to cut into without tipping it over. If you don't believe me, try it with your sharpest knife tonight. And obviously, I have no issue cutting in. I mean, almost no pause there. I've sharpened knives before, but very few of them get right in, of course, as I'm saying it. Yeah. These paper towel tubes are made out of gnarly cardboard, very fibrous, and then there's a glue seam running continuously as a spiral along its entire length. So pretty good challenge for a knife. While I was excited about trying out Ruixin plates, I will not be recommending them going forward. They are more of a gimmick than a useful tool. I'm sticking with SY Tool 10 plate set. And any additional cash of yours is better spent on the microscope, this rechargeable angle finder, and other things that I showed in this video. All the links that are recommendable will be in the pinned comment and in the video's description.